Hey, Angelo.
Hey, buddy.
I love your videos, man. You're like a self-inquiry AI. Yeah.
Can this see both of us or just you?
Oh, this sees everything.
Oh,
this is
sweet.
the,
Oh, 360.
yeah, 360.
So
Yeah.
cool.
So I wanted to ask you about like the later stages of awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So did you hear the research that they did?
I didn't.
You
I wasn't
Okay.
here.
So it was really interesting because they said they interview a bunch of people. Apparently, some of them like reached like I don't know anatta, whatever you want to call it, losing the center, whatever, to the point where they can't even distinguish between like doing and undoing, like form and formlessness. All that distinction will make sense to you, even awakening and non-awakening.
Yeah.
So they said even people like that reach that stage, they're still undergoing process of like emotional processing, cleaning up. They said it never ends. How's it for you?
I agree.
You
Yeah.
agree? Okay. So
for me, it gets subtler and subtler and subtler until it's like it's not. I mean, I wouldn't say there's personal suffering, but there are the sort of threads of suffering. You know, it's like I become absolutely fascinated with suffering and how it functions. But it's actually an act of compassion. Although I'm not the kind of person like pat myself on the back at all about it. But there's no other reason that this should clarify and deepen in the granular and exquisite way it does, other than what that can allow me to do for others. There's no point. Like for Angelo, it's over.
Right.
Like he ceased to exist. You know,
so
in a very real way.
It's like the stuff in the world.
It's energetic.
It's
very much energetic.
Rising kind of thing. Right?
Exactly. It's like the ninth octarting picture.
Right.
At least one Zen master described as exactly that. That's when the realization clarifies to the degree that enlightened and unenlightened are actually not distinguishable anymore.
Yeah.
That's a major act of compassion. That's the bodhisattva of compassion, right? Guan Yin and so forth. But also in the ninth octarting picture it says, I observe the forms of integration and disintegration and I am ever blissful. Like in my true abode. And that's exactly how it is. It's just this like exquisite, deep penetration of all of the energetics that are here all the time. And in that, things are untied, some subtler threads of suffering are dissolved, and there's a deeper knowledge and intuition on how to move with people energetically when we talk that somehow unlocks things for them somehow or helps that to happen. And so it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's no desire for an end to it.
Yeah,
because there is no beginning and end to anything, right?
But you find the realization still gets refined, it still gets deeper.
I say so, yeah. But not for someone. That's the key. Right. There's a key distinction that I make, and as you know, people like to ask, is there an end? There's a definite end to something. There's an end to the seeker. There is an end to the seeker. I mean, there is an end to the structure of identity, and it's very obvious. And it's very obvious beyond that, what's not there. It's the most obvious thing in this room is what's not here that's never been here. And when identity is deconstructed, far more goes away than you realize. You don't realize how pervasive identity is. It creates a physical world, the illusion of a physical world, an inner world, doership, agency. All of those are illusions, but they're all based on this subtle self-sense that you don't realize until the subtle self-sense drops out. And that can be a really big deal. For some people, it's like rather traumatic for a short time because everything's gone. You know, it's so different to live beyond that. And yet, beyond that, the conditions still exist. Conditions exist and karma exists, and it continues to refine itself. So realization moves from a place of absolute and total spontaneity. It's so beautiful. Yeah.
Speaking of conditionality, it's like realizing there's nothing but conditionality, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
even
right.
this is all just conditionality, but you see the emptiness of it. You see how if things are dependent originating, then they don't really arise, really. Because
exactly.
Whatever dependent originate cancel each other out.
Yeah.
I love the analogy you have about the particles.
Yeah, very much so. And the other thing that's interesting is just that this is an aside, but in one sense, only after the full drop of the self-structure can you really fully embrace the relative. It's just a total fucking paradox. But before then, there's always some pushing and pulling on the relative world.
Like back and forth.
Always something, right? There's always a little texture. But beyond that, it's so funny how easily it is to actually embrace it just as it is without having to like convince someone they need to deconstruct it and so forth. So there's just no agenda with even awakening. Like walking down the street, talking to people at work, there's zero part of me that's like, well, I have to help that person wake up.
Oh, I'm awake, you're not awake yet.
Nothing. It doesn't even register. And yet, when we're in an environment like this, and someone's talking to me about awakening, that's the most interesting thing in the world. Like they have 100% of my attention because I know the implications of that, and they're vast.
And that just arises due to the cosmic energy in the moment. Like on the street, the cosmic energy doesn't call for you to play the role of a teacher. It doesn't arise.
That's
but
right.
in this moment, that kind of arises due to cosmic condition, but it's still like.
And there's no value system. It's not better or worse.
Yeah, it's not.
Although it's fucking awesome.
I love doing this. It's amazing to talk about it. But when I'm not really doing YouTube videos or people don't ask me, I find myself like not even thinking about it anymore. There was a phase when like everything in my mind stopped except for spirituality or how awake I was.
Yeah.
But then eventually that drops as well. That's when like the true merging of like relative and absolute. Like that's
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Total naturalness.
Yeah. But I'm still like unfolding. Obviously, but then
we can all. There's always more to see.
Yeah, because reality is just
the one defining, not defining, but like sort of guiding principle I like to just say all the time, including to myself, is never underestimate the forces of delusion.
Right.
They're powerful.
Yeah, the sticking point.
Human consciousness has been around for tens of thousands of years. It's very smart. It knows how to trick you. You know, like it's so sneaky in a way. It knows how to hide things. It's clever. It's something you should have some respect for, the forces of delusion. But Eckhart Tolle personifies it, calls it the pain body. It's pretty clever, actually. He says it can go dormant, it can go active. It waits for the right conditions, and the right conditions are usually a bunch of mind-identified people with a huge pool of fear. That's when that activates, and people do really, really horrible things, or seemingly normal people, right? This is what we're addressing in this. We're doing it one individual at a time and going so deep that you penetrate the veil of identity altogether and eradicate it. And then the real work gets done. So even after no self, that's when the real work starts, really. But it's not done by anybody, which is like, again, paradox.
And also, yesterday you were talking about the unbounded consciousness as a first shift, the I amness, and then non-duality. And then what's the difference for you between like non-duality and anatta, the not self?
Well,
is it a shift there for you, or is that just like this?
I usually see it. I usually see it as distinct shifts in people, but it can come very close. Like they can come almost simultaneously, or like one after the other, like dominoes falling. That's how it was for me. But I have seen people who realize non-dual, clearly formless non-dual. They'll tell you, that's not an object. It's actually not there. This isn't here. This isn't here. It's very clear that there's no external world, and even they can really extrapolate. There's really no internal world, but there's still a tendency to pull back into an internal world. There's still something there that's operating that feels like an apparatus, even though there's nowhere to find it, and there's nothing to look for it with.
Right, but the whole kind of
it's a filter. There's something going on, and I've had people actually say, even for like a year, they'll say, "Yeah, I knew something else was there. I just didn't want to quite look at it." But then when it drops, I think it's the most obvious shift you ever have. It's the clearest and most obvious shift you have anywhere along the line. But the strange thing is the way people react to it varies a lot. Some people are really devastated for a period of time, like really freaked out for a day or two, 12 hours, a couple days, maybe a little longer. Other people, it's just like funny. Like for me, it was just a relief, and it was funny and obvious. Kevin Chandler described it. He's like, I just laughed, But I will say, after that happens, you're not done, meaning there's still vasanas, and vasanas can be very strong because now they're just energetic.
What's vasana?
Vasana meaning like a fixation, some karmic residue, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, so it could be desire, a certain kind of desire, or whatever it is. They can be very strong, and they're strong because there's nothing protecting them from just energetically taking the body. Like if you physically feel it so fully, there's nothing to compartmentalize experience anymore at all. Because the self structure was what allowed all the nested structures to compartmentalize experience to quote unquote protect you, which all that means is create an inner world that becomes complex and illusory. So none of that can happen anymore. So you may be like, oh, that's great. Yeah, until you feel that powerful energetic charge of a vasana moving through, but they tend to move through much faster. They tend to dissipate much quicker, but it can be rather surprising. So, you're just walking around with no filters and no boundaries, and you're at the mercy of everything all the time. But it does integrate. It actually integrates very spontaneously and naturally in a very beautiful way.
Speaking of Kevin's model, this is going to be controversial. I know that people I know you like ATR, right? Mm-hmm. People in the ATR are adamant about how even at like stage 5, whatever, or Kevin's 10-fetter model, even their model, dropping a 10-fetter is still only stream entry from the sutra's perspective.
Yeah.
Like, what do you make of that?
Well,
even like Dana Ingram's fourth path, like he calls it full awakening.
Yeah.
Dropping the center, and then for a lot of people who's follow the sutra, they're like that's only stream entry.
Yeah.
That's only the beginning. So like,
yeah.
is that anatta for you, like the 10 fetters, or is that still not just non-dual?
So
I don't know like stages, but like,
I'll say it this way. So like, when I talk about the fetters or the fetter model, I often, not always, but I often give the disclaimer and I say there are people who don't think that what he's talking about is actually what he's talking about in the polycanon. So I do give that because I don't know, and he doesn't know, and so doesn't. Nobody knows because we weren't there.
Right.
2,500 years
ago.
The
time is so different.
Right.
Triggers are weird.
Well, and the terms are things like attachment to formlessness, attachment to form, and ignorance. Like those can be interpreted a lot of different ways, right? So, but when you throw the whole rebirth thing into it, that just makes a whole other challenge, right?
Do you believe in reincarnation? Yes or no?
Dirty question. I will say it's a very obvious because there's been very, very clear recognition of it experientially, but it's not how our mind processes it.
Right.
It's probably not really in time. It's not a time-based thing. It's more causality-based and karmic-based, I think.
Yeah.
But there's been very clear experiences of that for me. So, but I tend to not talk about it mostly because it just
too much
people are going to misunderstand it. It's going to be a distraction, and it doesn't. You don't need to have any view on that to wake up.
Yeah.
So anyway, but so as far as the fetter thing, I'm not actually sure. But I do know that what Kevin describes is a very clear sequence of shifts that happen, and it's reasonably reproducible. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people doesn't work for them that type of model and pointing, but for some people it works quite well. So.
Like what you said about the sort of the sadhana,
Vasana,
yeah, because I remember I think Kevin gave a talk on POK. Said even after years after dropping the 10th fetter, he went to the therapist. I went to the therapist because he talked about it, like the eye thing.
Yeah.
He said stuff got released in the body, even though he can't find where the contraction is, whatever. Yeah. But stuff still got released, and he felt even more free and more spontaneous.
I agree.
So that inspired me to like do that too. Yeah. For a few sessions.
I totally agree. I actually enjoy those sorts of things way more than I ever did before, like whether it's circling or T group or working with. I don't have an actual therapist or anything, but I do have friends who are both therapists and very much awake, and I'll talk to them. I like to go through things. So when I found out about Kevin's fetter model, I didn't tell anyone anything about who I was. I found a person who does it, and I went through it with her. I just said, I want to go through that. And so I went through the fetters with her and stuff. It was pretty cool. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I try to fly under the radar sometimes. I did it with So when I met them.
You talked to So?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know So. Yeah.
Do you guys know awakeningtoreality.com? I used to love that blog.
It's pretty fun. Yeah.
It's interesting.
John's I've offered to interview him. He's like,
I don't do interviews.
Yeah. So that's my ultimate goal. It'd be really fun to interview him. But
he's like,
he's definitely under the radar kind of guy.
Right. Last question. I think somebody asked me earlier what I thought of Muji's scandal. There's so many more than wanted than that. A lot of obviously they have some kind of realization, but they still have sexual scandals and whatnot. What's your take on that?
On Muji specifically?
No, just in general. Why there's so many gurus that behave badly?
Oh gosh, so many. More than not.
Yeah, more than not. That's what I said.
More than not, right?
What would you? What's your take on that?
Honestly, one of the major reasons I wrote the book and do what I do is this stuff, because I met so many people in spiritual circles who had been with a teacher for 10 years, wasted their time. Teacher may have had an awakening at some point, but they just became abusive. There's so much freaking confusion everywhere, and it's available to anybody, and you don't need to have some very tight relationship with a guru necessarily. So that's really why I did what I did, because there's just so much of it out there. Why does it happen? I think various things, but one is I do think a lot of these people, I watched this series on Andrew Cohen, which is really good if you haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it, but I heard of it.
How to Start a Cult? Yeah, it's three parts.
I know you talked about it in the video as a response to the controversy. You said you believe he actually probably had a non-dual.
It seems like he may have had it, not non-dual. He probably had a first awakening. Probably. I don't think he had deep realization. I know he didn't because he's just way too. So egomaniac, massive desire for validation, massive fear response to deeper realization after an initial awakening, and just using your charisma to get what you think you need and want. And maybe being a little sociopathic, that's the perfect recipe for a cult leader. And there can
be awakened sociopath, right? Because yesterday they said
so, yeah.
Possible.
Yeah. I think after no self, it would be difficult to continue to abuse over time. I mean, at some point, because it's going to take care of itself very, very quickly. Because after no self, things just feel so different. I can't harm somebody without feeling it directly myself. You feel pain, I feel your pain instantaneously. And it does work on itself. It takes care of itself, but it can take a while.
It's like after a certain point, it's like reality will just move through the course of least resistance through you, and then that obviously creates more resistance in terms of even like reality's perspective. So you just won't do that.
Yeah.
So
when I talk to people, or like when I talk to people, or what I wrote in that book, I said the best thing you can do for yourself really is, especially after an awakening, is don't try to be a teacher. I mean, if you're a yoga teacher or whatever, that's fine, or mindfulness or meditation. But it's like try to actually teach people awakening when you just had your first awakening. You will screw it up. You'll screw it up for yourself, and you'll screw it up for other people.
Yeah,
take your time.
I can relate to that a little bit. Yeah, it took me a while to like, okay, I gotta look at this. But then
there's a lot of ways to screw it up.
And especially like like we talked about this a month. It's like the modern like social media mixing with awakening. It can bring up like some collective dark shadows because like it's a new phenomenon, really.
Yeah,
it's interesting, right? It's like.
It's got a huge benefit, like social media and YouTube. You can turn on YouTube and find people to point you directly to as deep of realization as you want. It's never been the case. Even me in the 90s when I woke up, like, there wasn't even the internet, really. I mean, so I never met another person who went through what I went through. I wasn't sure if there was any. I mean, I figured probably in the world somewhere, but I would not know how to find them. And but now social media, turn it on, get on YouTube, dial in non-duality, you're going to find some very authentic speakers and be like, whoa, I can feel it, it's so cool. Yeah. The other side of it is everybody, gets online and talks about everything that's going on in their life. So they're going through the awakening process, talking about it, and then they do have a shift, and you can feel rather enlightened for a few months after a first awakening. It feels like, it's gone. There's no pain anymore. There's no karma. There's no suffering. It's gone. Everything's clear. Everything, we're good to go. So you start making videos about that, and then you get the response from people, and they're feeding into your validation needs, and that can get co-opted real quick.
Yeah.
But they tend to just disappear too.
Those channels. I see people make like 10 videos a day about their awakening. Like 3 months later, they delete their channel.
They're gone.
That's why they woke up right there. They do.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Right on, my brother.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Frank, if anyone hasn't seen it, did you show the video of percentage?
Yeah, I showed that one.
That was so
and I showed a couple ones from like 10 years ago where I'm just lifting weights. I think that's why that would really he was talking about that one.
I love that video. It's like one of my favorite videos.